Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, an Italy travel podcast. I'm Darcy Melton.
And I'm Nathaniel Mellor.
And today we are talking about overtourism.
We are indeed.
And before we get into it, as always, we want to thank everybody who has been following us and leaving reviews. You can follow us and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I think for a lot of you that is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So thank you for following and leaving reviews. We really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about what we're talking about on this podcast, you can go to onlyabag.com where we have lots of articles written by us, Darcy and Nathaniel. You can also contact us there, and you can find us on Instagram at onlyabagpodcast. You can send us a message if you have any questions about your upcoming trip or about podcast episodes, anything like that, and we'll get back to you. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so by clicking any of the affiliate links in the descriptions of these episodes or on our website, or you can donate directly to us at ko-fi.com /onlyabag.
I love it.
Thank you. Is that everything?
I think that's everything.
Okay. Nice.
Thank you all so much for your support. We
Thank
genuinely
you.
appreciate it. So today we are talking about overtourism. While we are only in February, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Making sure. Double checking. We're actually recording this technically on Mardi Gras? Fat Tuesday? What are we calling? Is that?
Fat Tuesday? Yeah. Or Mardi Gras.
Shrove Tuesday? It's
Yeah.
Carnivale. There we go. That was what I was thinking of. Carnivale is today. So if you are in Italy and you are doing anything with, the Venetian Carnivale, or if you're watching any of the parades, we hope you are enjoying yourself. And if you are not.
in the U.S. too, and all over the world.
Right. Yeah. Not just an Italian thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That'd be very specific. If you're not in Italy, we hope that it's only a subpar time. No, we hope you're enjoying yourself immensely. But we are not talking about Carnivale today. We are instead talking about overtourism. Because, again, while we're only in February, I think it's about the time where we start seeing articles on overtourism, or is tourism ruining XYZ country, or is tourism, the end of the world as we know it, or how to be a more sustainable tourist. I think last year, the year before, 2 years ago, I want to say maybe, I know CNN put out an article, Is Italy Breaking Up With You? So Darcy felt moved enough to want to record an episode titled, No, Italy Is Not Breaking Up With You.
Did they title it that?
Yeah.
I thought we titled it that.
We titled, No, Italy Is Not Breaking Up With You, Just Needs Some Space, or She Just Needs Some Space.
Oh, okay.
But based off of there, Is Italy Breaking Up With You? And it was essentially, it came after, I believe, the end of a summer where there had been some more and extra restrictions put in place around, I think, whether it was limiting the size of tour groups or enacting fines for people who didn't use proper footwear while hiking along the trails in Cinque Terre. So it became this it was coming at this time of please stop coming to the country and doing it wrong. Just do it right when you're here. So that was, I think, a big impetus. And I know that right now, for instance, because you and I are in the travel vertical, we're signed up for all these.
What does that mean?
Well, I think instead of news, sports, entertainment, travel.
Oh, like in a newspaper, it would be a vertical. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So we're in the travel vertical, and we're signed up for all these travel, travel media, travel this, travel that, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of the emails I'm getting now, specifically literally in the past week, are this is the time where you start writing articles on best summer destinations and best beaches and best this, because that's when people obviously look at it to book. So obviously in the same sort of thing, I assume about the same time is when we're going to start seeing these, don't come to so-and-so, Lake Como is off limits kind of articles. So I wanted to talk about overtourism, mass tourism, and I wanted to look at it because I've always found this fascinating to when you and I do talk about this on the podcast, even to each other, but on the podcast, because it's been easy to kind of look at one thing and say, it's that problem. This is Airbnb is the problem, or mismanagement is the problem. And I think it's easy to kind of assign blame to one figure and then not, evenly or not appropriately. So now that I've given you the amuse-bouche, we can, I guess, jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
To today's episode. And I think the first thing to maybe establish, again, another reason is why we're talking about this, is the fact that in 2024, so we're in 2026 right now, from y'all listening from the future, not for the future, or for the future. In 2024, Italy had roughly 65 to 75 million tourists, which sounds like a lot. And it had about 330, 340 million nights nights slept, basically tourist nights slept, which
Okay.
essentially equates to each person sleeping an average of like 4 nights, 5 nights, depending on how long are they coming. In 2025, interestingly, the amount of tourists doubled to about 145, 147.
Wow.
And a lot of this, obviously, from those who remember, Pope Francis, I believe, passed away earlier last year
Yes.
after a
I
visit
think
from
so.
J.D. Vance. And then, when there was a new pope, also American, not also American, I just meant J.D. Vance is American, Pope Francis is Argentinian. When there was an American pope, they had a lot of visitors, obviously just because he's a pope, but it did bring a lot more Americans here. And it was a Jubilee year. So Italy had about 147 million tourists in total, up from about 65 to 75 million. Interestingly, though, the number of nights slept by tourists only went up by like 20 million, give or take, from like 340 to 360 million.
So does that mean people had shorter trips?
It does.
Okay.
And a lot of that could be attached to, and some of the statistics I was reading is attaching that to, you and I noticed, for example, this past year in Rome, you visited, I think, for a few nights. You visited your mom for one night. But we noticed first, because you and I like to do one trip to Rome just because it's, a couple hours away and it's like,
And it's Rome.
and it's Rome.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you can sometimes find a pretty, if you catch the deal at the right time kind of thing, or, it's a weird weekend where nothing's happening, you can get a pretty cheap hotel. And the trains are always fairly affordable. So, but not this year. It's like we kept looking and it was always like the same hotels that would cost us like 80 or 90 a night. We're up in the 190, 250 euros a night. So it looks like what was happening is a mix between hotels were planning on having more people there. So because of that, they were charging more. And then, so people who were normally staying 3 nights or 4 nights were now staying 2 or 3 because they could no longer afford the extra 250 euro a night, especially on top of everything else getting slightly more expensive. And for American tourists, which does make up the largest majority of largest single group of tourists in Italy, things have gotten more expensive back home. So it became this sort of, I don't know, multiple causes leading to the effect of a lot of tourism, but a lot of it had to do with, it seems like a specific event, the Jubilee, and then the death of Pope Francis, and some people came for both, and then essentially they came just for a day or two, maybe a couple more, and then left. Unfortunately, I meant to look up, I don't know if the statistics follow the same numbers for other European countries. Obviously, they don't have a Jubilee or a Pope in other countries necessarily. I guess Spain, technically, if you want to, there's the anti-pope or the other pope or the pope who believes the pope thing. It's a whole thing. It's a different religion. I mean, not the different religion, same religion. This is already off topic. I apologize. I was
Oh my
really trying to
gosh.
keep it
Wow.
on topic.
Okay.
It's somebody who's left that church has claimed it's all a scam, basically.
Oh,
But there's somebody had a dream
I did know about this.
in
Okay.
the 80s, I think, that they were the pope, and then the pope at the time was not like the pope anymore. So it's a very conservative church in Spain. So I mean, some people go to see that pope. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know enough about popes or things. Man, this door is opening. That is creepy.
Our living room door just opened and it continues to open. It is quite creepy.
Bruh.
I don't want to go touch it.
Nope, that's a haunted door.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
So we paused to close the living room door and get the laundry inside because it went from a bright sunny day to storming and hailing in just a few minutes. It's a wild time.
It's a wild time. And we're back.
And we're back.
And the door's okay. I thought it was a cat maybe coming in from outside somehow, but it is just a door opening.
We have a really intense draft in the house sometimes, so
We do.
I think the storm brought it in. So, over-tourism.
Over-tourism. Darcy has elected to keep that in the episode as she...
Everybody should know we might have a haunted door.
It is important and integral to the experience. And so, yeah, over-tourism. We're talking about, essentially, I didn't know if other countries experience the same surge. After all, if you are going to Italy, you might want to tack on a few other countries. So it might be something that people who would normally come to Italy for 4 or 5 nights were actually instead coming for 2 nights and then visiting other countries on their trip, especially because we did talk about, I want to say at the end of 2024, early 2025, as it was a Jubilee year, a lot of different tourism outlets weren't sure if people were going to basically make this the trip, like the sort of like, oh, we're going to Italy, but then we're going to visit a lot of other countries, or if it was literally we're going to go, we're going to pay respects, walk through a door, get forgiven, and then head home kind of thing. So unfortunately, I did not look at other countries, but know that Italy's basically doubled. It's also, so I just, again, in terms of background information, it is one of the top 5 tourism earners in the world. I believe behind, believe, if I'm not mistaken, like United States is number 1 in terms of tourism,
Okay.
which is fascinating to me because I guess it isn't, but like I, I'm American, I suppose, so I don't, and I've seen laughably little of the United States. I think is also part of it,
Mm-hmm.
So so I guess when somebody goes, I'm like, what do you see? And I realize when somebody else says it, they're like, there's so much to see. The Redwood Forest, the Grand Canyon, New York, San Francisco, Miami, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, right. I meant, what else do you see? But I realize it's the same thing I imagine for Italians in Italy. Like, besides Rome, what do you guys coming here to see? And then it's like, oh, right, okay, we have the other cities too, I suppose. So, but I think it's United States, Great Britain, France, Spain, and Italy are like the top 5. And then I think Germany and a few others, mostly Europe. And then interestingly, actually, just for more for flavor than anything else, United States, this will be an interesting year because of how difficult and antagonistic maybe the United States has been this past year. It's actually falling as a tourism destination,
Of course.
massively from Canadians, but also from Europeans and also from pretty much everywhere. So a lot of Europeans, and actually instead of going to the United States, have decided instead to go to the Middle East, basically for swimming, for tourism, for sort of shopping, et cetera,
Interesting. Okay.
or Asia, but mostly the Middle East, which is experiencing a tourism boom. Though again, kind of coming back to over-tourism, there might be some articles about, like, I don't know, is Abu Dhabi over-touristed? So we'll see. So, but this all leads me to basically come to the point that Italy has dubbed or has created this problem. There is a problem called the 99% problem. It's what they've dubbed the problem.
Okay.
And it's that the fact that 70% of Italian tourists only see 1% of Italy. So on average,
70% of people who come as tourists to Italy.
yes.
Okay, got it.
Will only ever see 1% of Italy.
Okay.
And I think 1% is a bit like obviously it's not, it feels like one of those fun numbers that not made up necessarily, but like, is that by, geographical size? Like, what is 1% of what do you mean, like 1% of all tourism destinations? No. They see the top 10 tourism destinations and then leave. 1% of geographical area makes less sense, but I get what they're saying. I think they're saying is, Rome, Florence, Venice, and even there, like you and I have been writing an article specific about an itinerary, and just, it is hard to encourage somebody who's never been to Italy to not go to Rome, Florence, Venice, because it's essentially the 3 best places you could go on your first visit, just straight up in terms of, ease of being a tourist in those places. They're used to tourism. They have everything you need to see, from the, big city, the chaos, the intrigue, the art, to the medieval city, to the, city on the canals. I mean, it's got like everything you need. So it's one of those things, I think, where, of course, 70% of people who come to Italy see literally that. If that's 1%, see that 1%. So it makes perfect sense. And of course, this is a problem that a lot of the tourism industry in Italy is trying to solve. So essentially that kind of provides the groundwork for this episode, if I may. Over-tourism does lead to, in the eyes of Italians specifically, again, this for different countries, it might be different things, but when polled, and then when they asked a bunch of Italians, like, basically they asked like a number of questions. The first one being, do you like tourism? And surprisingly, while I think a lot of articles are going to talk about how Italians are over it, a vast majority of Italians do like tourism. It is unfairly balanced, I will say, in the south and on the islands. So Sicily, Sardinia, I assume half of Corsica, and then the south, I think it's roughly like 70% of Italians view tourism favorably. And a lot of that, I think, is to do with the fact that outside of like the Amalfi Coast and in Naples and Pompeii and Campania, there's very little tourism in Campania. Calabria, almost none. Puglia obviously has some tourism. Basilicata, I think, maybe sees 2 tourists a year, arguably, possibly. Obviously, Sicily has a number of tourists, and even that is fascinating. Like when you and I talked about Cyclone Harry, mm-hmm. and how they essentially is about $1.2 billion euros worth of damage because of the cyclone specifically, and how the government had already promised 300 million, with hopefully the rest more to come. But in fact, they produce about 1 point something billion a year in tourism revenue.
Oh,
So
really?
there's an interesting
The
argument.
entirety of Sicily?
The entirety of Sicily, because I
Okay.
think if I'm not mistaken, Italy itself is in the 10 to 12 billion, 15 billion a year solely from tourism.
Okay.
And that's a bit of again, that's a number that it, it is not like foundationless. I mean, it has to do with, how many hotels and restaurants and city taxes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still one of those things where, I don't know how weighted it. I mean, Italy's GDP is not massive by any length, so they very much do rely on tourism. But this is just simply to say that Sicily, it is not something where they've undergone this tragic, sort of event, and now they're saying, can we have tons of money to repair it because we, poorly planned. It's also like, hey, that money that we've actually been creating for you year after year, can we just get some of that back to
Right, of course.
fix it, to keep creating, So I just thought that was interesting, because I know that obviously sometimes after a natural disaster, there are people who say like, well, why would you deserve that money? As if first off, you have to argue for money after a natural disaster. But second, it's kind of like, well, because we actually made you that money, so we just like it back, please. Anyway, that is neither here nor there. So when Italians were asked, what is your biggest issue with Overtourism? First off, if you like it, and most said yes. Then they said, okay, so if you had an issue with it, what would it be? And then, or do you have any issues with it? And if so, yes, no, what are they? The three biggest issues are housing, lack thereof, trash, and overcrowding in major areas, basically. So, and that's something I think we're essentially talking about today, and then in Friday's episode, those are going to be the three sort of tenets of this this mini 2-part series, is looking at those three problems of housing, overcrowding, and trash, and what that means. Interestingly, though, and I think I made this kind of as a fourth, not quite the same, because it's less of an issue. Well, basically, it's called hit and run tourism or day tripping. But a lot of Italians like to use the term hit and run tourism because I think it sounds more
I mean, it's dramatic.
flamboyant and dramatic. And as you said, even just yesterday, you're talking about a news story, and then how like in Italian, like the beaches are disappearing, they're washed away, there's no more beach left, and then you're just like, okay, it's like a high tide outside of Rome, right. But it was written as if it's like the apocalypse in the beach. So I think Italians have a penchant for a dramatic flair.
Certainly in news and headline. I mean, every country has a flair with their headlines. It gets dramatic, but it's noticeable here.
Yeah, no, it is. And I guess, yeah, no, it really is. And to talk about this hit and run tourism, this, if you will use the dramatic, or day tripping, and I say it's not so much of an issue because people aren't necessarily day tripping from outside of Italy into Italy.
Okay.
And maybe 7 people, whatever, from France, from Nice, go to like Milan for the day, right? Or from Germany to, Alto Adige or something like that. It's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is day tripping once you're already here, because it's sort of like when people stay in Padua and they consider this day tripping as well as when they stay in Mestre and visit Venice. They're not staying in Venice, they're staying in a different city and then visiting a different, like Venice, a different city. So this all falls under the sort of headline, if you will, of day trips, hit and run tourism.
So in that case, do you think that people feel the onus or the responsibility, the struggle of tourism falls on the day tripped city? Like if someone's staying in Mestre, does the issues lie then with the city of Venice struggling under the weight of that tourism rather than Mestre bearing some of the weight? Is that the argument?
That is the argument.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's the argument exactly. It's essentially when if someone were to stay in Venice, some of that money that they pay to the hotel would go in form of taxes to Venice to keep up the city.
Of course. Okay.
Or they would pay a city tax to help keep up the city. They'd buy food at a restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. They would both inject money personally into the pockets of Venetians, but also into the city to keep up the infrastructure. Obviously, that does not happen when you just visit for the day, especially before or on the days where there's no city tax, or excuse me, not the city tax, but the entry fee. For lack of, which is a ridiculous. We're going to get into that too, don't worry. So the biggest issues just for day trips, in case you're curious, or listeners, you're curious, and again, this isn't to sort of, I want to be very, very clear, this is not to dissuade you from day tripping. It is on a personal note, I will say, it is the sort of, the evil that you must do. What is that one called? The
lesser evil?
No, I guess the lesser evil, but it's just sort of like the when you have to do it, but it sucks, but you have to do it anyway. No, you have to do it, but like it is not everyone can afford to stay in Venice, for example.
Of course.
And there's a huge argument being made about like we can't allow tourism only to be for people who have tons of disposable income, because disposable income is not as common as it used to be. And even within Italy, disposable income is not as common. It used to be in the 50s to the 80s to the 90s even, where you would spend almost a month on the beach because people had that kind of money. And now between the cost of, well, literally the beach chair is now, I mean, astronomical, let alone staying the night, let alone the food, et cetera, that's becoming like maybe we can afford a week, if that. So I think this idea that like, not everyone can afford a week or a couple nights in Venice. It's also, when I think people talk about tourism anyway, it is becoming something maybe more, it's for the masses, for lack of a better word. It's like we are definitely in an age where more and more people can afford to visit places. It's not like astronomical plane tickets followed by you can only book if you happen to have the phone number of a place, or if you have, if you're lucky enough to like be able to contact them ahead of time or set up fax. It's more like, or just show up at the train station and hope for the best. So this is all to say it's sort of a necessary evil in the sense of like when you do go to, I don't know, to Florence, for example, it's unlikely that you're going to be also spending the night in San Gimignano, but it is pretty common to take a day trip there to just explore the city. But there's not enough there to really sustain people spending the night, essentially, whether it's in hotels or restaurants or things to do. I mean, you spend a few hours in San Gimignano and then it's like, wow, we've literally walked the city like 4 times. That is not a very big city. Siena, I think, is better. It's much better in terms of obviously a city, but then if you take day trips out of Siena, same issue. So this is all simply to say that I think day trips are a natural part of traveling anywhere. Mm-hmm. And even if you're at home, I mean, depending where you live, you might take a day trip. Like, we're from Savannah, so a day trip to Charleston isn't like out of the question. It's like, right. Yeah, it's a 2-hour drive, and then we can spend the day in Charleston, which just for a change of scenery. This is all simply to say is if you are planning on day trips, I still highly encourage you to do so. This is more of I guess this is something like the cities are aware of this as an issue. So it's a question of what are they going to do to sort of mitigate the issue, for the residents. The biggest requirements, one is essentially bus parking infrastructure. A lot of tourists, Venice, not as much, obviously, because it's an island, but a lot of tourists do come via bus. And I think around Tuscany is a great example of San Gimignano, if I can use that again, doesn't really have a bus parking lot. It has like
It really doesn't.
A parking piazza area. Mm-hmm. I don't know, even that's not a great way to put it. It's like
there's
a roundabout.
There's a road that goes around a large sort of roundabout circular park where the buses park.
And then cars do as well. Mm-hmm. And I mean, because you can't drive into San Gimignano. So maybe if you can, if you're a resident, but most people cannot drive into San Gimignano. Siena is another example where the train station is actually at the bottom of the town. And every time we've talked about Siena, we've explained that while taking a train to Siena is lovely, you do have to take the city bus into town or walk, which is a pain because it's uphill. However, if you were to take a bus, the bus actually drops you pretty close to the top, like to the actual center of town. And however, that is infrastructure that has to be created specifically to support, well, buses and people coming via bus, which if it is people day tripping from Florence, it's essentially this imbalance of you're creating a lot of infrastructure in a place like Siena's putting a lot of money into bus infrastructure that in fact it's like people staying in Florence are the ones using it, not anybody staying in or using it in Siena, because I think now they have a route, like they use city buses routed through there, but still it looks like primarily the buses that come through there are buses that are from outside of Siena. And now, of course, I think, to be clear, the Autolinea Toscana, the auto line, the bus line in Tuscany does use that as just like a hub, essentially, like a
That's what I was
hub.
thinking, because when we were there, or the couple times we've been there, the bus parking in Siena and the accessibility of just taking a bus for a day trip or for a couple hours to another place, it seems very convenient because of Autolinea, right? Toscana, and then the location of their bus parking lot.
Exactly. The other one is public transportation to and from those bus parking lots. Not often are they going to be as well located as the one in Siena. Sometimes they are a bit out of the way. And actually, even this is not Italy at all, but it's an example is just simply the one in Paris. If you're going to fly through, I think it's Beauvau, which is a very tiny airport, like an hour north of Paris. It's one of the ones that like Ryanair, Wizz Air, all those sort of budget airlines fly out of. You have to get a bus up there. It's a private bus company. And then they don't leave you like in a nice, like sort of centrally located part of Paris. You're kind of just out in the northern part of Paris, and you have to then get on a different bus or I don't know if there's a metro nearby. There might be, but you have to get on a different bus. And essentially what the cities are arguing is like, we have to create infrastructure to get tourists from there because we can't just leave tourists there and you can't necessarily bring the buses into town. So somebody has to pick up the slack here. All because, and this is the same thing with Italy, is because a lot of airports are offering subsidies to low-cost carriers or even not low-cost carriers to get them to bring tourism so they will eventually make money, which is apparently a mix between the airport offering subsidies and then the country itself offering subsidies.
But then, like you're saying, there's slack between getting people from that airport into the city.
Yes.
Okay.
Just like with the Salerno airport that opened recently, it's basically kind of marketed itself as the Amalfi Coast Airport. And there's one bus company running routes there, which it's cool. It's awesome. I love that running routes there. They're also doing it for a bit more money than they were running routes to a town right next to it, if that makes sense. So it's one of those little things where, like, I think it's 5 or 10 euros, something like that, to get from the airport. But then if you happen to just be from a town next to it, it's $1.50, €1.50, because they have to use the regional pricing, and because
of course
it's not that far from Salerno, you can't charge out the nose for it. Next is the personal health services, such as hospitals or doctors or not immediate meds, but there is there's medical services in place for tourists specifically that are free.
Okay.
So, but it's again the city itself. Typically, it's a mix between the city and the federal government, but both are paying. And if the city is paying for it, and they're not paying for the people coming to visit their city, it creates a bit of like disharmony. Essentially, if again Venice is saying like, we have this medical tourism medical sort of guardia di turistici, like it's like we have a Guardia di Medica, which is, I guess, is the medical place a resident can go like after hours or at night or whatever it is on Sunday when everything else is closed if they have an emergency. There's a similar one in a lot of major cities, specifically for tourists. Ideally, somebody there speaks English. And essentially, they're saying, we are financing this, but we aren't financing this with money spent by somebody coming to day trip here.
The money to have that program keep going doesn't come directly from tourists. It comes from citizens.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then landscaping. That is apparent.
Landscaping.
Yeah, apparently that's a actual thing. So
How is that a problem?
So apparently they would not pay for landscaping from like outside of certain areas because it's just not like the beautiful parts of town.
Who wouldn't?
The city.
Okay.
So if they're like, you're going into this like tiny little bus stop outside of town and we now have to get you into town, but you're passing through like just not the greatest part. We need to make that look beautiful. But yeah, it feels very Italian to be like, well, what about the landscaping? But and I realize too, it's the same thing. I mean, if you were to arrive at like Napoli a Fragola instead of Napoli Centrale, which you shouldn't, no one really should ever, but you might for some reason, you might accidentally get off the train. You'll notice that it's, you're in a farm surrounded by industrial area and it's not very nice. And eventually they are trying to make it more beautiful and create like a lovely sort of way to get into the city. So it feels like, oh, I'm entering Italy, not like, oh, I'm going to get murdered out here. Yeah. So it's it's a different vibe, but that even Tiburtina is another example of like, 10 years ago, it was kind of just like a bit of a rundown. There's a train station and there's a bus station, but you're like, this is not very nice. And now they're trying to beautify it because so many more people are passing through Tiburtina. They're trying to get more and more people to pass through it eventually because they don't have to turn the train around. So the idea is that they can get more people through Tiburtina, then the train can keep going straight down to Napoli a Fragola, where it also doesn't have to turn around, unlike Napoli Centrale and Roma Termini, which trains have to turn around in both of those. So it's just more of a pain for the trains specifically, plus it makes them run late, plus if there's anything on the tracks, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
So essentially, we have to pay for extra landscaping. And then finally, waste collection. And that goes back to one of those three major things of housing trash and overcrowding. Trash, waste collection. Essentially, the amount of waste that is produced, and I know is a huge issue in Venice. They're essentially saying the amount of waste that these people, specifically cruise shippers, cruise ship tourists,
okay,
were producing, far outstripped the sort of the fact that they were paying nothing and then using the sort of waste management services.
Right.
And that sometimes includes like now having to, sort of clean out the canal or clean out this or get trash from there, blah, 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 blah. Like,
Do you know, I don't know how cruise ships work or how your statistics are written. Do you know if that is trash and waste created once the tourists are inside the city, like walking around versus, okay, it's not like the waste coming off of the ship.
cruise ship. It is not. I believe they have to pay for that.
That makes sense.
It is just when the people go like around town.
Right.
And sometimes too, and that was the big thing, is a lot of these articles by like tourism experts were basically saying, even if you personally are like, they kind of leave no trace, like I had a granola bar when I was walking around, but I put the trash in my pocket to throw away on board the ship, that kind of thing. It's still not everybody is like that.
Of course.
So it just,
and you and I have experienced, I mean, we try to not waste a lot and we try to not like buy things with absurd amounts of packaging and things like that. But when you're at home, it's so much easier to manage your waste than when you're out and about traveling. Like if you need a water and you forgot your water bottle.
Exactly.
If you need a snack, if you need this thing and that thing, it is remarkable how quickly you can accumulate waste. I think we've noticed.
Honestly, that is, and then literally receipts, which I know that for some people, you need it for taxes, you need it for this, you need it for that.
And businesses legally have to give you one.
And they legally have to give you one. And it's just like, I mean, sometimes it's like, I have like 94 receipts for something. I don't, why would they give me a receipt for coffee? I mean, they have to, again, legally, but it's like, it was 80 cents that I've lost 80 cents doing like laundry. So it's just one of those things I think where you do end up with a lot of like just random bits of things. So the daily cost for this per person, like per tourist, depending on the city, came out to about €2.90 to €4.70. Interesting.
Per day, per person?
Per day, per tourist.
Okay, per tourist.
So essentially they were saying like each tourist would have to pay anywhere between €3 to €5 to be here if they were doing nothing else.
Okay.
And that is how Venice arrived at their number.
Ah.
So for Venice, it's on the very upper end. It's €4.70. So they say, let's call it €5 that anybody wants to come for the day. They spend €5.
Okay. I get that.
And as I mentioned, and I think maybe this will be sort of the last couple of things I want to mention to kind of, before we get to the next episode on Friday, because it kind of maybe rounds up this portion. And then I guess the next portion will be equally long. I apologize, everybody who's like, is any good news in this? It is all good news. I mean, none of it is good news, but if none of it's good news, it's all good news.
That's not a thing.
I didn't think so. I was hoping it would be. Okay. So there's a dream. So Venice, just to be for clarity, we talked about this before, Venice instituted their fee specifically to reduce the number of people visiting Venice.
Okay. Like as a deterrent.
As a deterrent. They were like, if we charge people to come in here, fewer people will come in here. That was the thinking. There was, no limit of tourism groups that were saying that's not going to work. Barcelona, for instance, has a very famous park. I wish I remember the name of it or wrote it down, and I didn't. But they not only charge a fee, they also limit the amount of people coming in per day.
Yeah.
It is a public park that now has a fee and limits the people. I say now, it's been for like 5 years. But the thing is, it creates a theme park effect.
Right.
Because I'm paying for a ticket to get in. Not that you can do whatever you want, but it's like, in Disney World, for example, they are there for you. It's like, I'm paying to be here. You're here for me, not like,
right.
Again,
There's a sense that you're paying for a service.
Exactly. And I think that, and a lot of people were like, as soon as you do that, every Venetian is suddenly, like, against their will, going to be part of this masquerade that is Venice, rather than like a city, a functional, actual city that has people living there. So, but their whole thing was like, no, let it be a deterrent. Trust us. It did not work, obviously. It immediately did not work. And in fact, when they released their numbers after the first year, they found that some of the days actually had an increased number of people from the year before on the days that they were charging fees. So essentially, a lot of these tourism sort of associations were saying, see, it failed, take it away. And they just saw that Venice specifically, like their coffers went from, I think they made €2 million a year from just people visiting the city. I think from the city tax, it went to €4 million. They essentially doubled their yearly income just off of tourists.
I thought it was almost 5 million last year.
Okay, that is insane, because this was just after the first year.
Okay.
I think so. They instituted 2023. So after 2023, they were like, we just doubled our money. So it's kind of like trying to tell people, like, hey, all that money you just made, don't make it anymore, and instead, just do better. Like governing, I suppose, was essentially what it came to. It's what I think it gets more complicated. And did you have a statistic?
I do. I'm actually going to our own website because I recently
God, I
wrote
it.
an article about the Venice fee. So I'm just going to double check the number. I figured I might as well.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you already had it up. I apologize.
I don't. Sorry.
Okay.
Please keep going.
Well, I was going to say, so it also creates this, one of the big arguments against it is it creates this sort of concept that Venice is for sale as long as you pay the right money. Mm-hmm. That is something we saw this past year, 2025, when Jeff Bezos had his wedding there and essentially did buy out the city, arguably. It turned it into a red zone, which essentially was like, you could literally, like, a residents could pretty much do nothing in the city because it was essentially under constant surveillance. It was constant helicopters flying overhead. There were constant armed patrols walking around, security guards, private security, police.
That's so gross.
Yeah, and it was a lot of, not just obviously for Jeff Bezos, but there was like the presidential family. What do we call them? The first family was there. The Americans' first family was there. You had other wealthy people. I'm sure people who own islands were there. It was a whole thing. So what ended up happening is a lot of Venetians felt like this isn't my city. You just rented out my city. And it wasn't, I mean, again, I don't come from, and I don't know if you come from a city that does that. I mean, we have big weddings in Savannah, but not, I mean, like, I think the only time is like, I think we had, I believe, like, I think Bush came to town once.
Sure.
Like in early 2000s. And that was like the closest.
I think presidential candidates have come as well too. And like celebrities. But it doesn't.
Well, I mean, like specifically the presidents, when they came, they did shut down part of the city.
Oh, yeah.
But the rest of the city was like.
Still functional.
Yeah. You could just, it wasn't like, oh, I have to go. Like, even if you had to go through an area, it was still like, oh, we can route you around. It wasn't like in Venice where it was like, yeah, good luck. You need to show multiple forms of ID. And it was like, to get back to my own house, this is, again, still a city.
Also, the way Venice is set up is that you can't get to everywhere from everywhere. You have to take specific bridges and roads in order to get to your house or to work or to wherever you're staying if you're a tourist. So if those were blocked off and if you were being checked through different areas, that is incredibly inconvenient and very invasive feeling, I imagine.
For sure. And that was, I think, the major argument is, again, this is... I mean, I say this too because things like this happen. And we talked about even this idea of like ID being checked. That is still fairly common in Italy. Like the cops can at any point for any reason stop you and ask to see your ID. It's just, I guess Italy as a thing. But it still felt for a lot of Venetians very invasive because it all of a sudden did feel like they were not allowed to live in their own home. Yeah,
it's different from their norm.
Do you have a statistic before we move on?
I found the number. So it is over 5 million. It's almost 5.5 million that they made in 2025 from the entry fee.
Is that just from the entry fee?
Yes.
Okay. So this was in 2023, I think it was the first year they did it, and they only made 2 million for a total of 4. 2, I think, was from the city tax, and then 2 was from this fee.
Okay.
So now, again, let's just assume they still make 2 million from a city tax. That's 7 million, arguably, that they now have, like, that they didn't.
They're getting in fees from tourists, essentially.
Exactly. And it's still, I mean, I cannot find genuinely where the money is going, like, at all.
And I think that I know for a fact that whenever this fee was first instituted, a lot of Venetians protested about it, and a lot of them had a concern about where the money was going to go. And I don't know how people feel about it largely now, but I think the sentiment is still, where is this money going? Like, if it's going to help the city, that's one thing. But if Venetians don't know where this money's going and it's just going into a random coffer somewhere, as you said, that's not good.
And not even that, because I mean, one of the fears isn't that it's going to a random coffer, but it's like the city councilman has hired their cousin to do a public work project that nobody needs, but for 10 times the value kind of thing. And it's like, well, we need that for tourism, and it's like, no, you don't need new railings for tourism. That was not necessary, but now you've just paid hundreds of thousands of euros rather than that, which, again, this happens unfortunately like too frequently. Like, there's definitely the it's not what you know, it's who you know is very powerful in Italy, but unfortunately it still has an air of corruption to it when you find out, like, oh, the people who won that whatever it is, that contract is actually in fact related, or is actually in fact was not the cheapest bid by a long shot, or whatever it is.
And I think that's the same in a lot of the world, but
sure,
it's not great.
It isn't great, no, and it makes people angry, because I think on one hand Venetians get angry because it's like, essentially, we're not getting that money that you said would go towards Venice, but also they're saying stop charging people to come in here to see natural wonders, because that is also, we've talked about this before with the Trevi Fountain, but most Italians do agree, like per this polling, that you should not charge fees to certain things. Trevi Fountain, Pantheon, Venice, they're like, these should not be places that are behind a fee. And I think, well, this argument, like one of the arguments in place for, besides this deterrent argument, was, I think one of the people behind it was saying, like, nothing in Venice costs €5. Like, that is, I mean, in the sense of it, that's not even the price of a coffee in Venice, which is entirely untrue, by the way. A coffee at the bar costs far under €5.
So this person's argument was that $5 is nothing. Like,
Yes.
just pay $5. Everything in Venice is expensive.
And as you can probably tell, that already undermines their own deterrent argument.
Right.
Of if you're saying that this amount of money is a deterrent, but you're then also saying everyone can afford to pay it, it's only $5. And if you can't afford $5, you can't afford Venice, or €5, excuse me, then you can't afford Venice. Then it's like, well, then it's not a deterrent, is it?
And there, like you said, there are certainly things in Venice that cost less than €5. A coffee, an Aperol Spritz, cicchetti,
Fratelli? I mean,
pizza
yeah.
slices, a sandwich. There are a lot of things that for tourists cost not that, and for regular citizens.
Yeah. So it felt just like it was a bad argument from the beginning. And it also, I mean, it pissed a lot of people off because they were just like we're talking about now. They're like, if that is your argument now, then clearly the deterrent argument was not your real argument. You just wanted to make money.
Right.
But for a couple more statistics, I apologize. I know y'all are hearing a lot of numbers, but the reason it kind of comes to a head, especially this year, 2025, not 2026, this past year, now that all the numbers are in, it was the first time ever, and I thought this was interesting, that the number of daily visitors to Venice surpassed the number of people living there. So 50,000 daily visitors, and there was only 49,000 people living there.
49,000 people live in Venice?
This is not here nor there, and we're going to talk about this a little later in just a minute in the next episode. But Capri, interestingly, has 13,000 people living there and surpassed that 50,000 daily visitors like a while ago.
Right. Having visited Capri in the off-season, that feels accurate.
Yeah.
Some of Capri feels like a ghost town in the winter.
No, there's like no one living there. So, but that was big for Venice because, again, Venice is still, like Capri is arguably never really been a functioning city outside of tourism. Well, not never. Sorry. There's a huge fishing history. I guess I meant more like
it wasn't as like industrialized or developed.
And post World War II, and even pre World War II, I mean, you had tons of European visitors in terms of like artists and writers and painters and things like that. And even post World War II, it was a pretty popular destination for Italians to go visit for the beach. And then it kind of exploded from there in international growth again after World War II. So I say that in the sense of I think tourism has often been wrapped in to their, at least in the last 100 odd years, because I mean, I think we talked about in one episode, like Ischia had like the last kidnapping by pirates in Ischia was in like the mid 1800s, like, which is like 7 feet off the coast of Naples.
Right.
Like it's right there. You see a ship come in and kidnap somebody and you're just like, dang, that sucks. It's right there. So I know it's not Capri, but still, do you think these Ischia, again, it's like a small town. It's kind of like what it's now known for, but outside of, I think Procida is actually the only one that ever had it had major fishing, but also shipbuilding.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think when the Italian Navy went to a different like shipbuilders, they essentially lost their, because I think they were making like giant steel ships and no longer like small steel ships or wooden ships. Then it was kind of like, oh, well, there it goes. So that was interesting. And then the number of beds for tourists also surpassed the number of beds for residents, which just means, So and the count number of beds is a little bit weird because it is counted, I believe, bedrooms. So when an apartment only has like 2 bedrooms, they count that as 2 beds, obviously, even though you can maybe get 4 people in that apartment.
Okay.
It's still, they're not going door to door. How many beds do you have in your house? It's just saying this is a 2-bedroom apartment. So we're assuming 2 beds, or we're assuming a 1-bedroom apartment. They're not saying, oh, it's like 4 students living here.
Right.
So that is a little bit of a harder number in terms of to quantify, but it's still number of beds for tourism. So hotels and Airbnbs have surpassed residents. 6 out of 10 houses in Venice are now tourist-only rentals, which is fascinating.
So more than half of homes are tourist-only rentals.
And I think for me, because again, we come from Savannah has a lot of quasi-suburbs, like 1950s suburbs, no, 1920s suburbs. I think more than 50s suburbs.
20s and 50s, yeah.
I was thinking not like the not the what is that first ever suburb in Long Island called?
Tiki Tack Town. What's that called?
Something like that, right? Anyway, so
I can
y'all know
hear
what
the
I'm
song
talking
in my
about.
head. All the boxes on the hillside.
But yeah, y'all know what I'm talking about. There's that famous. It's like
people are shouting the names to us right now.
There's that famous sort
Levittown.
Levittown. Love it.
Recesses of my mind.
Just clawing it back.
Yeah.
So that was obviously the first suburb, and I think I say that because Savannah has the very more 20s. Like it's not giant yards. It's like everybody has a little yard, a little house, and it's just kind of so a lot of the suburbs of Savannah. So you're never that basically the point is you're never that far from the center of the town, the downtown area, and everybody kind of, there's a lot of houses. And then I think later there are apartment buildings, but it's still a lot of houses. So a lot of people did grow up, whether in multiple subdivided houses, but it's still in some way a house. And I mention this because it is kind of like looking outside and knowing that more than half the houses on your block are not only like not lived in year round, it's just not even arguably locally owned. Like that could just be a giant investment company that now owns this property because they want to rent it out. And of course that is happening in the States. So I know that was a big issue with this. I think not even post-COVID, but like during COVID, it was like, I know that was a big issue everywhere. It was basically these giant, BlackRock, I think was one of them, buying up all these neighborhoods and essentially renting them out rather than ever, and then just jacking up the value. Same thing in Venice. So people are essentially saying like, not only is 6 out of 10 houses not owned by, like not like for us, but a lot of them aren't even owned by Venetians or even like Italians in many cases.
Yeah, that's not cool.
And then likewise, a lot of the stores that were once sort of like traditional stores have been replaced with basically kind of cookie cutter stores. And often, again, not necessarily locally owned or even Italian owned sort of. So it's essentially it's like people coming in saying what this place needs is another tourism, like another key rings and magnets and fake masks and things like that. And they can afford to pay inflated rent, especially if it comes from a company that is like, oh, we have that could be a loss leader, but we have a footprint now in the Ponte Vecchio, or we now have a footprint in, and that's Florence, obviously not Venice, but
Ponte Rialto.
Thank you. In Venice. So it's like, it's that type of situation that I think they're getting frustrated with because again, this does come into like where it now sits, because I think now, and this I guess maybe was the point of the episode, is like Venice as a case study, because Venice does now stand as a warning to a lot of other Italian and European cities. I mean, Barcelona kind of looks towards Venice with fear because they're going through a lot of the same issues now with just incredibly high rents, incredibly high cost of living. It's difficult for Barcelonians to live in Barcelona. They have to live outside of Barcelona and then commute to work, which is like, again, there are these sort of, I mean, we have them too in Italy, as these suburbs of literally apartment buildings outside of a city. And there might be a couple of shops, but like you still have to go into, it's weird. It's like the worst of both worlds. It's like, I think suburbs in America are like, what if you had a house outside of a big city? So instead of living in a tiny apartment, you had all this space. And the trade-off is you do have to commute an hour to work. But I feel like Italians took it like, what if you lived in that tiny, weird little apartment, but like nowhere near anything else, like an hour away? Is that better? And it's like, is the rent cheaper? No, that's the best part. It's the same rent that you were paying 10 years ago or whatever it is. So I know Barcelona and Berlin, Amsterdam there are all these cities that are tons of tourism are looking towards Venice and saying, we don't want to become essentially like Venice because it's prioritizing the tourists over the residents. And as we'll talk about in the next episode, this is a paradoxical effect where if you're not putting money back into the city, not only will tourists stop coming because it will start to lose what makes Venice Venice, which
of course
right now obviously it's the canals, but if the canals are not maintained, if they for instance were to kept allowing cruise ships rather than banning them back in 2021, I believe, if they were to keep allowing them to come and destroy the lagoon and destroy the canals and flood it and destroy the buildings, it basically is like everything that made Venice Venice is going to disappear, and every Venetian who made Venice Venice is going to disappear until what you're left with is actors in a role of Venetians for people to visit this theme park rather than an actual functional city that people live in.
Absolutely. And like you're saying, it's such a good case study. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it is a good example of it, because I think when tourists visit somewhere, we want to see the most authentic version of that place.
Exactly.
No matter where you're going, you want to see the people who live there just going about their day and participate in local businesses. Like, you want to get local goods and be a part of that place for that time that you're there. And likewise, I think people who live in a lot of heavily touristed cities, coming from one in Savannah, it's not like we have animosity towards tourists. Of course, like there's a little superficial sort of like, the tourists
exactly,
sometimes, but you want them to have a wonderful experience and enjoy the place where you live. And Italians certainly want, I think, everybody who visits to enjoy the place where they live. Like Italians really want to share their culture. They want you to see the beauty here. So I think tourists and regular citizens have a lot in common and want the same things for each other. And it's city governments who just aren't seeing that.
And that's actually something, in terms of the segue, that is something we'll get into the next episode, because that is a lot of actually where this falls. As much as it's easy to, again, blame, going back to what I talked about at the beginning, as much as it's easy to blame Airbnb or landlords or like privately owned like foreign interest companies that are buying up these houses, it is in fact still comes down to city governments and what they are doing or not doing in order to protect the interests of the residents, who and oftentimes voted them in on these sort of things specifically, only to have the person they voted in not sort of
Uphold their promise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, as a last note, we mentioned the three tenets of this: overcrowding, trash, and then housing, or lack thereof housing, being essentially the core of this episode, as well as, I guess, as it turned out, Venice is a case study. And I think that actually does loop in quite well. I like to think that I did that on purpose, where those three sort of issues are the three biggest issues in Venice, as well as day tripping being the other one, which is how we got in there in the first place. But it is basically far too much trash for one city to deal with without making money somewhere else.
That does make sense.
You have to have 2 or 3 times you have to go out and empty trash cans rather than once a day. Or you have to have people like monitoring the canals, because otherwise, again, who's coming to the canals of Venice if it's filled with trash? Because I think it used to be like, the stories of, oh yeah, people just dump their washers or whatever it is in the canals. But by and large, they have been cleaned. At least, I mean, don't go swimming in them, but like,
right. Don't do that.
They try to make them not disgusting, because when it is low tide or when it's the summer and there's not a big sort of surge of well, it's not high tide, and it's not flooding, basically, you can kind of see the bottom, and it does not feel awesome to see like a bunch of trash everywhere. So basically, between the trash, between the overcrowding, and which is obviously Venice is like sort of the poster child of overcrowding, and between the soaring housing costs and lack of housing for residents, it has become this sort of case study of what not to do, interestingly, in Italy. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about kind of like what other cities are doing, some ways of potentially solving this, what some other cities are trying to enact in order to sort of curb it, but also the conversations happening between these tourism associations and then cities themselves.
Cool.
So we hope to see you there.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear it.
And I was going to say, thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you for listening. Tanti abbracci.